You guys might be too young for that.
A little bit. Just
that reference was lost on me.
Google Teddy
Dang.
Ruxpin later. It was the hot toy when I was a kid.
Wait, was this like the talking bear?
Yes.
Okay.
He had a series of things he said, and
yes,
I
that
feel
was
like
before my time.
It's like, okay, hit the Big Ten championship button, he talks. Hit the Dakota Matthias button, he talks. Hit the
We're
white
gonna hit all those buttons.
press button.
It's like you're in our brains.
I have no idea
don't
what
know?
you're talking about. I have zero, nothing.
You millennials.
I know. I'm super.
Your Snapchats.
I know. I honestly had no idea how Snapchat works.
Me neither. But anyway. Okay. All right. Do you want to? Are we live? Are we going?
Yeah. Whenever you're ready.
Hello and welcome to the Purdue Basketball Beat. I am Michael with Anish and special guest Brian Born Ready Neubert.
Woo! Hi, Brian.
Hi, Brian. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing well.
Lovely.
Fantastic.
Feeling like champions is what we're feeling like.
Feeling like 23rd times champions. So let's start off with that, actually. When this season started, did you think that this team had conference champion potential?
Yeah. I mean, I thought they were going to be right there. I expected Caleb Swanigan to be a significantly better player than he was last season. I don't know if I thought he was going to be, a National Player of the Year type of player, but I expected him to be a lot better. I expected the guards to be more mature, to show the benefits of, additional experience. And I just expected Purdue to be better. I didn't know what they were going to be defensively. I don't think anyone did. I think as bad as they've been at times, they've still been better than a lot of people anticipated them being. Obviously not as good as the best case scenario would have been, but they have survived there, and that's what they sort of needed to do. This team obviously came into the year with a lot of pieces in place. They obviously lost A.J. Hammonds, Raphael Davis, two enormous pieces, but when you look at what was coming back from last year and what those guys had accomplished prior to this season, and when you look at the improvement that a lot of us figured Caleb Swanigan would make because you saw the flashes you saw last year, and those of us around the program know how much time he put into things this offseason and how driven he is. I figured they could be a lot better than people thought they'd be. I don't know if they've been a lot better than people thought they'd be. I mean, they're one spot behind where they were ranked in the preseason AP poll right now. But I thought they definitely had a chance to compete for a Big Ten title. Obviously, we didn't know what to expect from somebody like Michigan State. We didn't know what to expect from the Ohio States, from the Indianas and whatnot. Obviously, the Big Ten being what it is, when Indiana struggles, when Michigan State's a little bit down by their standards, when Ohio State is down, there's an opportunity there. We obviously didn't know that in advance of the season, but the way the season's played out, it would have been a shame for Purdue to have not won this thing from their perspective, because what they've been able to do this season with this kind of team, the opportunity was right there for them to take it, and they've had a team good enough to do it.
So Swanigan's jump from last year to this year was really remarkable. And Anish and I were talking a couple weeks ago about his performance in the game against Little Rock last year, where he had six points and 10 rebounds, which is not, 10 rebounds is pretty good. But it's hard to imagine him having a stat line that low this year or against a team like Arkansas Little Rock.
Right.
Is this really just the result of him grinding in the gym for several hours a day, getting on the Stairmaster after games? What's been that thing that's been driving him to make such a huge improvement? Well,
if there's one, I guess, common denominator, I guess, to maybe oversimplify this, I would say he just calmed down. And I thought last year, he came in wanting to dominate, but also expecting to dominate. And, things don't come that easily at this level. And it felt like he expected them to. He's used to dominating everybody who crosses him, so to speak. And it just wasn't going to be that easy. And it wasn't. for all the good things he did last year, there was a lot of give and take because there was a lot of struggles, a lot of inconsistency. But I think the most important thing for him was to just calm down and understand why he struggled last year and carry himself a little bit differently this season. Just be more patient. Let productivity find him, Don't be so overeager. That's easier said than done when you're used to being the best player in 99% of the basketball games you play in. But I think more than anything, he just calmed down. He just kind of, to use a horrible coaching cliche, he just sort of lets things come to him. And the other part of it too is I think that he's the most driven individual player I've ever covered, and he obviously is a very ambitious kid and went through the NBA process last spring. They told him what he needed to get better at, and this is a kid who everything he's ever been told he can't do, he's just done. And I'm sure he heard some things that he didn't want to hear at that time, and then I'm sure it pissed him off, and he did everything physically possible and probably some things physically impossible to a lot of people to improve those things. And I think Purdue's been the beneficiary of that. He's improved in every phase of the game. He's improved tangibly, intangibly, and he's more of a winning player now than he was a year ago. Before he was it was everybody else in Swanigan, and now it's Swanigan is much more embedded in his team. He's much more part of things, and he's much more about winning. I'm not saying he wasn't last year. I'm just saying I think he knows how to go about it better now.
Do you think some of the late game issues this year are him Swanigan kind of reverting to that trying too much? Because I found that when Purdue is first of all, Purdue's kind of pulled out a lot more late game close wins than you would expect, than any kind of Pythagorean expectation would expect. But the ones that Purdue hasn't, it seems to have been as a result of Swanigan kind of an ISO Swanigan, like in the post. And it seems like at those times he reverts to freshman Swanigan, like freshman Biggie. It seems like he's trying to put the entire team on his back. He knows that the team is on his back, and that's when he starts to struggle. Do you think that's where some of the late game issues come in? Because honestly, that's the only time that we can find any fault in his game. Like, because otherwise he's been pretty damn near perfect.
Right. Well, I think the Nebraska game is one example of that. I think, Purdue gets the ball right where they want it, 3 straight possessions, whatever it was. And I think he probably just wanted to steamroll the guy in front of him as opposed to pulling up and shooting his hook shot, whatever the case may be. I thought at Iowa, one of the other close games, they couldn't put away. I think you get the ball right where you want it. And if a guy's a 55% shooter, that means you're going to miss 45% of the time. And he missed one right at the rim. But at the end of regulation against Minnesota, they go to him. He ties the game, gets them into overtime. When they had to win the game at the end against Ohio State, at the end of regulation, they go to him. He gets the foul. He makes the free throw. This after he passed out of the post to P.J. Thompson for the biggest field goal of the game, the three-pointer. Maryland, that was a toss-up game, and he makes a really big three. He passes out for a really big three. He made a lot of plays just to get Purdue into those positions. But I think that he's a guy you can trust to make the right play and to, if he's going to attack the basket, a guy who's going to have a pretty good chance to get to the foul line, and he's an 80% shooter. And if that doesn't present itself, he's proven himself to be a guy who can make the right decision, pass the ball at the post, and find 3-point shooters. So I think that's a big part of the reason why Purdue's wanted to get the ball to him. I also don't know if they have that alpha, on the perimeter in terms of, sometimes when you want something quick, you want to go through your guards. I don't know if Purdue has that playmaker yet. Carson Edwards obviously has the physical ability to do it. Whether he's mature enough at this phase of his career to do that, I'm not quite sure. I would, if I were Purdue and I had one possession to win the game and I have a guy who's a matchup nightmare for everybody he goes against, I would probably get the ball to him every single time too, because he's that good and that versatile player.
Do you think along with what you were saying earlier about being embedded with the team a little bit better this year, do you think that was a conscious decision on Swanigan's part to work on that aspect of being a good teammate, and that pays dividends as far as being able to trust his teammates more?
Yeah. First things, I'm not sure I'd call him a bad teammate before. I just don't know if he was ever, fully a part of things. He was with USA Basketball his first summer, didn't get on the campus till midsummer. He wasn't around his team as much, and I just think that was he had an unconventional recruitment. Coaches didn't get around him very much. I don't know if he trusted his coaches. I don't know if quite yet. I don't know if the coaches knew him as well as they probably do now. I think everything was just much more comfortable this time around. Part of being a teammate too is how you interact with your teammates, and a lot of great players can tell you. There's a reason great players don't always become good coaches, is because they expect the people they're around to perform at the level that player has always, that coach, that GM, whatever it may be, has always operated at. So when Magic Johnson coached, he was bad because he was coaching players to be Magic Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on a lower level here, Caleb Swanigan, players of that level maybe aren't always as patient with teammates who aren't playing at the same level they are. And I think that was an adjustment for him too. I think he expects people to follow his lead and to play like him. And when you're as good as he is, that's not always realistic. So I don't know if he, handled that all that well last year. I think he's handling it a lot better this year. He does have good players around him. I don't want to sound condescending when I say that it's Caleb Swanigan and a cast of thousands here. But I do think that was an adjustment for him a little bit, acclimating to a team that maybe he didn't necessarily relate to quite as comfortably as, would have been ideal.
Well, so on one hand, it's you brought up Carson Edwards as one of the premier kind of shot creating wings at that, or at least like that. As the ESPN people say, the alpha dog wings right. on Purdue's roster right now. Is it an issue that Carson's coming off the bench in favor of Ryan Klein, who is this has been a behind the scenes debate at World Sports for a while, but I actually do think that Klein fits alongside the front line of Vince Edwards and Caleb Swanigan a little better because he's just kind of a stand there, role player. Right. But at the same time, it's that added personality that Carson Edwards brings is, I don't think that I can even come up with any kind of comparable in the past. So like, is it because that's the only kind of player that Purdue has. Vince Edwards has the talent to do so, but he doesn't necessarily have the disposition to assert his will. Dakota Mathias, really only in this past week, this IU game, have we seen him kind of really like put his will on the game. The only player that seems to fit your description has been Carson Edwards. So do you think it's an issue that his minutes are being reduced?
I think this wasn't a move made, with one game in mind. I think this was a situation where things maybe came too quickly for Carson Edwards. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that, he came in right away and a lot happened for him real fast. And I had people in the summer telling me that he was going to lead Purdue in scoring. And I'm like, no, he's not.
Yeah.
You haven't seen scoring.
Come on, man.
Look, man, he's going to be good. He's not going to lead Purdue in scoring. But, there's always a process with freshmen. Sometimes you don't even see it, as an outsider. Right? I mean, like I go back to the freshmen in 2007. Those guys made everything look so easy when it wasn't. And, there were hard times for those guys, too. There's always going to be, some adjustments for freshmen. We just talked about Caleb Swanigan, who's as talented, as physically prepared a kid you're ever going to see coming into, college basketball at Purdue. And you saw what last season was for him. Oftentimes it was a total crapshoot. Carson Edwards is the same way. He's got a coaching staff asking him to be as aggressive as possible, but also make good decisions. And that's an unbelievably difficult balance to walk when you're young. I think things happened for him so quickly that a lot of the process was skipped over. And now it's like, perhaps it might be a good idea in the long term and the short term for him to maybe ease back a little bit and kind of retroactively go through some of that process. I know the people around him are completely on board with it. I know they probably have some understanding of what this can mean for him, that this is something he can benefit from, that it's not a matter of, hey, Purdue doesn't like you, they don't think you're any good anymore, so you're not starting. It's a situation where, as Painter always says, much to our exhaustion, because when you've covered a guy for 10 plus years, you hear the same things over and over and over again, and your gag reflex gets triggered. But he always says, when you make a move like this, you want it to benefit both guys. And this was a move to benefit Carson Edwards more than it was to punish Carson Edwards. And, you know, all of those things you talked about before, about that alpha trait in him, that unconscious, you know, scoring mentality, that aggressiveness. One might argue, too, that might be more impactful when you get into your rotations. When you bring that off the bench, it shakes up the dynamic of the game and maybe changes things a little bit. So you could kind of look at it both ways. I know Painter, I thought Carson Edwards was untouchable in the starting five.
Mm-hmm.
I know Painter, just the matchup dynamic, that I know he thought that his quickness and whatever else balanced them out as a starting unit. And you can certainly make a case for that, because if you line up Carson Edwards and Ryan Klein, have them run 40s, then Ryan Klein's not getting out of the gates before Carson Edwards is done. But
is Ryan Klein even starting before Carson Edwards finishes the race?
Yeah, from a physical standpoint, they're two polar opposites. But I thought Painter was enamored with that, just from a matchups perspective, from the mix of the starting five. So I was as surprised as anybody when he did it. But then when I kind of heard why they did it, and, you know, what all went into it, it really does make a lot of sense. The goal here is to make Carson Edwards better now, but also make him better later, because this guy has a chance to be, you know, a star at Purdue. And there's going to come a point in time where all this size is gone and all these seniors are gone. All of next year's seniors are gone, and you're going to have to cut him loose, and he's going to have to be your guy. And, you know, anything you can do now to make him better later, no matter how important these games are now, I think that's something that could be worthwhile.
Along with that, you said something about the people around Carson Edwards being on board, you know, just understanding like the reasons that Painter would do something like this. Is this the type of decision that's I don't want to say vetted, but maybe a decision that he would approach those people, whether it's family or advisors or whatever, with to say, hey, this is what I'm doing beforehand? Or how does that dynamic work?
Yes,
between a player and a coach?
Yeah, I mean, coaching is management, basically, and you want to know, you know, the ramifications of your every move. And coaching is also a relationship business, and coaching nowadays too is also a placation business. So anything you do that could cause any sort of, you know, ripple, whatever the case may be, is something you vet pretty thoroughly. And I'm sure, I know there have been instances where Purdue has moved people to the bench out of the starting five, and they've talked to their family first to get kind of a beat on what they're feeling and how they think the player will react. I would be surprised if that wasn't the case here, in terms of there being some conversations with, you know, some of the players' confidants. And in fact, I can say with relative certainty that was the case. And as I mentioned before, they're on board with it, if not encouraging it.
So this is, I mean, like, listen, we're just a mere blogging site, so I think we can approach this question pretty directly. This is avoiding a Ronnie Johnson situation, right? Because Ronnie, out of a lack of both, he was extremely skilled when he came to Purdue as a freshman. There's really no doubting that. But there were also there were no other options. But Purdue didn't really have another person to turn to on this roster. Purdue has PJ Thompson, who is the entrenched point guard. He is not going to the bench no matter what, right? So it is who starts alongside PJ Thompson, whether it's Dakota Mathias and Vince Edwards seem to be cemented in the starting lineup. Obviously, Caleb Swanigan is cemented in the starting lineup. So then you get to the last spot, whereas you're battling with a shooter versus what you bring, a dynamism that you bring to the starting lineup. So basically, is this? I mean, my question is boiled down to: is this trying to avoid a Ronnie Johnson situation where he seemed to be enabled by a lack of alternatives on the roster, or is it more he is trying to specifically talk, say, Ryan Klein, you've played better, because I do think that in terms of the long view, Carson Edwards is essential to produce success in, like, let's say 2019,
right,
2020.
No question.
So is it trying to avoid that situation? And it seems to be that Carson Edwards' camp is okay with it. This whole Knucklehead Central Carson Edwards is going to transfer thing isn't. Can you address that?
The body language expertise. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me use my words carefully here. To the comparison to a past player you made, this is about making Carson Edwards a better player now, making him have to sit back and understand, hey, what do I have to do from a preparation standpoint? What do I have to do from a assignment standpoint? What are the little things I have to do going into every game to be the player Purdue wants me to be right now and needs me to be later? This isn't about, destroying a program's culture or, all the problems Purdue had a couple of years ago that they suddenly didn't have anymore overnight. So this is not a character issue in any way, shape, or form. This is a freshman going through some freshman difficulties, maybe not even difficulties. This is a freshman going through the freshman learning curve. It's just that curve was accelerated early, and now maybe it's just being curbed a little bit. This is not a situation where a kid's already checked out on his team. He's not leaving. This is not a situation where, in the defense of Ronnie Johnson, I know he's become this sort of poster boy for everything that was wrong with Purdue, and there was something to that. But he came from a very difficult, very unstable situation,
yep.
And we are a product of our environments in a lot of ways, and that was a situation that was just a really, really difficult one for a lot of people, involved, and that's not the case at all. This is a situation where this is just a player who's everything about him is stable, takes bad shots sometimes, makes bad decisions sometimes. But that's not a character indictment. That's a kid who has always, this is what's made him good, played 100 miles an hour. I mean, this is video game basketball. This is score, run, press. That was the basketball he knew, and that's the basketball Purdue is asking him to play in a lot of ways. We need you aggressive because aggressive is what makes you good. But at this level, possessions matter. So we need you to be aggressive, but don't turn the ball over. Don't take bad shots. And I mean, it's a really fine line to walk. It was a really fine line for E'Twaun Moore to walk. It was a really fine line for a lot of people to walk, and it doesn't happen overnight. And
we were spoiled. We were really spoiled with E'Twaun, weren't we? Because he seemed to be, he seemed to be gifted with both, the gift of the gunner, and also just like he never really seemed to make a bad decision. Like maybe a couple times early, around the Wofford game, right? But beyond, once it hit Big Ten season during his freshman year, that seems to be who we're comparing everything to, isn't it? Like subconsciously, it's like he just seemed to be perfectly in control the entire time while being able to flip that switch, proverbial switch. You're right. It's extremely hard for a freshman to do that.
There were each one more. There were a lot of great Tuesday nights, a lot of great Saturday nights, but there were a lot of really hard Thursdays.
Yeah.
Nobody ever saw. And as I said before, that whole class made everything look so easy. And I mean, that's what it looked like, but it wasn't as easy as it seemed. And it's not supposed to be easy. It very rarely is easy. And it seemed almost too easy to be true, for Carson Edwards. Now it's just kind of being curbed a little bit. He had an adjustment to go through, and now I guess they're just kind of playing catch up a little bit with him. But he's going to be a really good player. Everything I've gathered about the kid, all my interactions with him, he seems like he gets it. He seems like a mature kid. He seems like he's a part of this team. It's hard to be with the only freshman, too. I know that the coaches talk about this a little bit before the season, but I saw it out there in the summer that he's getting yelled at left and right, not because he's messing up all the time or he deserves it, but because he's the only freshman. They have to yell at somebody. The guy who, and when I say yelling, I mean coaching, not screaming, not browbeating. Somebody has to be taught, and the guy who doesn't know what he's doing yet, more often than not, is going to be the guy who gets the bulk of the teaching directed at him. Teaching and yelling oftentimes are the same thing, so that was an adjustment for him, I know.
I've heard Matt Painter likes to throw the ball off the backboard, so maybe he's been the recipient of that.
Huh.
Well, but I think it's also important to remember, even with Etuan, like he did have an amazing freshman year, but there were still, maybe not coming from him personally, but people around him who were thinking that, maybe Matt Painter was not featuring him the way that he should have, right? There was this was a guy who was supposed to be a one and done, whether that was true or not, but that seemed to be an attitude around some folks around him. But Etuan stuck with it, trusted in Painter, took his lumps, and really benefited from it. So if we see a similar trajectory with Carson Edwards, not saying that Carson Edwards is going to end up as an NBA pro, but there is a blueprint there for dealing with that and moving forward.
Well, Etuan Moore had a lot more self-awareness than a lot of the people who thought he was something that very few of us thought was reasonable. Etuan Moore has been one of the real success stories from Purdue because nobody thought he was going to be a pro because he's not the physical prototype for his position. He doesn't have the quickest release on his jump shot. He's not the quickest individual by a long shot. He's smart. He knows how to play basketball, and he's taking advantage of every opportunity that comes his way. But no reasonable person looked at him coming out of high school and said, that kid is a one and done. Oftentimes in basketball culture nowadays, it's the unreasonable people who have the loudest voices.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes the young, impressionable kids listen to the loudest voices. And the young, impressionable kids, when they're not as self-aware as Etuan Moore was, buy into it. And that screws these kids up before they even get to college. And then the coaches have to take all the blame for everything that went wrong when something was never really a reality in the first place. It's a really difficult – recruiting is a really difficult endeavor beyond simply trying to get a kid to come to your campus. It's a really, really – these guys get paid a lot of money for a reason.
That actually is a great –
the coaches, not the players.
It depends on the university.
Sometimes the players do too, but I was talking about the coach.
That was actually a perfect lead into my next question, which had to do with Matt Painter. Thinking back to the last Big Ten championship, which was in 2010, how have you seen him evolve as a coach in those 7 years? Is he pretty much the same guy he's always been, and it just kind of works some years when it doesn't, or have you seen like some real specific areas that he's grown as a coach?
It's a good question. He's more open-minded as a coach than the internet gives him credit for. When you look at the teams he's had at Purdue, they've won any number of different ways with different teams, different personnel, the different big men they've had. They've all been different, and they've won with all of them. And when they didn't have a good big man, they shot threes and took care of the basketball, went to the NCAA tournament, won a game. He's been more flexible than I think a lot of people think. Offensively, defensively, he tried zone. Zone is always a great idea after Purdue loses. They tried zone. They sucked at it. They scrapped zone. What they're doing this year, or what their intent was almost a zone-like concept in man-to-man, because their personnel is very different from what they've had in the past. So they've kind of eased back on their pressure quite a bit, and they're playing a different style of defense because to acclimate to their personnel. They don't have athletes on the wing. They don't have a rim protector, and they're just sort of making the best of it. Now, some guys, again, have surprised. Rafael Davis, that one year when they had John Octius, they put in the zone figuring that they wouldn't have a point guard who could guard, and they wouldn't have a really good wing defender. And it turned out John Octius fell out of the sky, and then Rafael Davis, went from bad to great in the course of 3 months as a defensive player. Now, this year, Dakota Mathias has gone from bad to good overnight, and that's probably offset some of the need for him to have changed his philosophy defensively. But kind of long story short, when you look at all the different sets of personnel, when you look at all the different styles Painter's won with, he's always been pretty open-minded in terms of what he's changed, what I see from him now. I just an older, wiser coach, I guess. Things have changed a little bit in recruiting. Early on, it was Indiana. We're going to recruit all the best players in Indiana. And then what happens is you offer them all as freshmen, they commit, and then you're stuck. And when you look at the downturn, those were all early commit guys. And you can't look at a kid as a 15-year-old and say, hey, I know what this kid's going to be as a 19-year-old. And that got Purdue in trouble, basically. I think he eased up on that a little bit. There are kids you just know when they're young. You have to offer them. But I think he cast a wider net. He's gone all around the country more. I think that's helped him find kids who fit better at Purdue, the Vincent Edwards, the Dakota Mathiases, and whatnot. Those kids weren't available in Indiana at the time. That's what you needed in your program then, and you went elsewhere to get it. I don't know if you would have done that a couple years earlier. I think you've seen a coach here the last couple of years acclimate to the realities of college basketball. This was a pressure, man-to-man guy, force turnovers, get in people's faces, hedge every ball screen with bigs, that kind of thing. And now you're looking at a team that's known for three-point shooting and known for feeding the post. This is an offensive team the last couple of years. This hasn't been a defense-defined team. And their whole mentality, when you go back to 2007, whatever it was, to today, is 100%, 180. I can't speak. 180 degrees different. That speaks to the flexibility of the coach.
So do you think – so I think it's going to be really interesting to see Tom Green and IU are destined to divorce probably here fairly soon. And so IU is probably going to bring in a new coach. How is that going to affect recruiting for Purdue, do you think? Has when I was growing up, IU was the premier program in Indiana, and Purdue was nipping at the heels from a recruiting standpoint, right? IU got their pick, and Purdue sometimes got region folks, but really nowhere south of the region. But now it sort of doesn't seem like there's that big of a difference. Do you think that? Do you think the right coach at Indiana sort of resets things back to the historic levels, or are we looking at a place now where Purdue and IU are on much more equitable footing?
Well, Indiana is always going to be a factor for the best kids in the state. If Purdue were more reliant on Indiana than it's been the last couple of years, I would think turnover at IU and the requisite buzz and honeymoon that would come with it would be impactful. But Purdue, I'm staring at their roster right now. I'm looking at their starting lineup: Ohio, Fort Wayne via Utah, on a player that you got because of the specific basketball plan you put into place and the trust that Matt Painter had built up with his people over a very long period of time. That's not a situation Indiana's going to go into and beat out Purdue for. Mm-hmm. Carson Edwards is from Texas, P.J. Thompson from Indianapolis, but a kid IU never would have taken. Dakota Mathias from Ohio. Ryan Klein's a kid IU wouldn't have taken probably. Jaquil Taylor's from Massachusetts. Matt Harms is from the freaking Netherlands. Isaac Haas is from Alabama. I mean, this isn't an Indiana-centric roster anymore. I remember years ago, it was right before Purdue exhibition game. Colin Hartman and Devin Davis committed to Indiana as sophomores. That was brutal for Purdue because they wanted Colin Hartman desperately. And
pretty close there too. Yeah.
I really like Colin Hartman as a player, but I don't know if he's the sort of guy where you can look back on it now and justify being devastated over losing as a sophomore in high school. It just goes to show you that when you recruit all the best players in Indiana and they commit early, you're stuck. Bryson Scott committed as a sophomore. Basil Smotherman committed as a sophomore. Gone. Ronnie Johnson.
Colin Hartman was the next Robbie Hummel, right? Like that was the comp everybody was making.
Right. Well, he was also a really good. Purdue liked him culturally. They liked how he fit, into what they do. At the time, Purdue had used Hummel in that sort of skilled four mold where he would have been good. I thought if he'd come to Purdue, Purdue would have known how to use him in that sort of role. But point being, Indiana, no matter who the coach is, they're going to recruit nationally, and they're going to cherry pick Indiana. But Purdue right now has cast a wide enough net all around the country in recruiting. If you don't get this guy from Indianapolis or that guy from Fort Wayne, you just go get somebody else. I mean, it's really not that big a deal. People don't. I don't know if people always understand that coaches don't live and die with this guy or that guy the same way fans do, because fans are looking on the internet and they see stars next to names, and over a very long period of time, they come to really like that player. They want that player. They know that player has this offer, this offer, this offer, and this offer. And if that player comes to Purdue, they are validating your program by saying, we're coming to Purdue instead. Coaches have a lot of recruits they recruit. When they don't get a guy, they just go get somebody else. They don't take it personal. They can't. It drives them crazy.
So on one hand, first there are two more players I just want to address in terms of their off-season growth and not as much growth. So first, I think it's worth talking about Dakota Mathias. I think that I was always kind of a skeptic of whether he would be ever an entrenched starter at Purdue, and he's turned into pretty clearly, I think, Purdue's second best player. I mean, in terms of defensively, you said he went from bad to decent, bad to good. I think he's gone from bad to above average, and in fact, he's really Purdue's only above average defender on the roster. And combine that with the fact that he's kept his playmaking going. He's still a fantastic passer. He's still a lights out shooter. Was there anything that clued you in the off season to signal Dakota's growth over the season, or was this a surprise to you as well?
Yeah, no, I always thought he'd be really good. The two things that mattered most were just health. He, for whatever reason, could not stay healthy. He was always getting sick. I think he had was it vertigo there for a while, scurvy.
More oranges.
If they had it, it seemed like Dakota Mathias was getting it there for a while, and that just, for a kid as motivated. This is a kid who's lived in Ohio, would come to Purdue's practices with a notebook and he'd take notes, and that's just obscene. But I think it drove him crazy that he couldn't be good because he couldn't stay healthy. The bigger part of it, I shouldn't say the bigger part of it, the just as big part, if that's proper English, it probably is not. The equal part of it, equally significant. There we go. There you go.
There it is.
4 hours of sleep last night. The equally significant part is the part where he knew he was getting minutes this year. I always call it the shooting guard Hunger Games last season, where they were playing too many two guards. They were trying to get Kendall Stevens involved. They were trying to play Klein. They're trying to play Dakota Mathias. None of them were getting enough minutes to really do anything, to really get any confidence or get any sort of rhythm. And then, before long, Kendall Stevens, his situation comes up. He falls out of the program, falls out of the rotation, I should say, then falls out of the program. It's just Mathias and Klein coming back in that role. You saw the benefit at the end of last year from Mathias of consistent minutes. And he played really well at the end of last year. And I think Purdue used him at point guard in overtime of the Little Rock game, if I recall correctly. That just shows you the trust they have in him. And just the fact he was healthy, I think being a starter is a big deal to him because he's a really confident kid, but he also kind of needed the validation that he is what he believes himself to be, that his coaches view him the same way he views himself. I think that was a big deal for him. And that and the consistent minutes, the guarantee of the consistent minutes, I think were really, really comforting for him and allowed him to stop worrying about what happens if I turn the ball over, what happens if I miss a shot, am I going to get pulled out of this game? And he's a very motivated kid. He's like Swanigan a little bit, very different people, but you tell him he can't do something and he will flip you the bird and go prove you wrong. He was sick of hearing about Purdue's guards not being very good. He was sick of hearing about how he couldn't defend, and you've seen this season what he went out and kind of did about it.
So on the other end of that, it seems like Vince Edwards has come in and he was, an instant, 12, 5-5 player. Vince Edwards has long been a favorite of mine. I like it all, just putting all my biases on the table. I think he's, I think he's the most skilled player Purdue's got in the outside Swanigan category since Hummel. I think he's the Hummel that I always, and I don't think that's, same with Micah Shrewsbury. I think that's what he saw in Edwards. Yeah. But is it me or does Vince seem to be the same player he was by the end of the Big Ten season his freshman year? There hasn't been too much growth. He never puts together two halves. He always shows up one half or shows up for 10-minute periods here or there. Yeah. It's frustrating in the sense that he could be Purdue's best player. He could be the guy that controls the pace of the game for Purdue, and it just seems like he floats sometimes.
This is really big coming from you, Anish.
I know.
Anish has a whole notebook of Anish plus Vince with like little hearts. He's got like Vince. Anish Edwards written. Like this is a big moment.
He's so fun.
He's a really good player. Putting all my biases on the table, I've always liked Vince Edwards too as a player. I mean, I watched these kids in high school and AAU. I always thought he was a perfect fit for what Purdue does. I figured he'd be a 1,500-point scorer.
Yeah.
At Purdue, which he's going to be. He just passed 1,000. So, but I also figured he'd be a really good rebounder, a really good passer. He's led them in assists 2 years prior to this one. He's been a really good player. I know he ended last season playing like a great player in some ways. Maybe it hasn't always showed up this year. He's always talked about how when he's aggressive, he's good. And the obvious question there is, then why aren't you always aggressive? I think, and I'm only speculating here, but I've always kind of wondered about what Swanigan means for him and what the big men mean for him if he's not too deferential in the sense that, he sees his opportunities, he takes them, but if he doesn't see his opportunities, he doesn't look for them. And, he Purdue's better when he's attacking off the dribble. Purdue's better when he's shot faking from three-point range and driving. Purdue's better when he's posting up. Purdue's better when they run stuff for him. And I've said for years, well, was he a junior? I've said for almost a year now.
Yeah.
Run more stuff for Vince Edwards. Get him post-ups. Because good things happen. The last time I tweeted they might want to post up Vince Edwards more was the second half of the Notre Dame game. And they did it twice and only traveled both times. So it shows you what the hell I know. But I've always thought, really good things happen when they post him up. Really good things happen when they just put him in positions to make plays. But really good things happen when he is aggressive, when the opportunities present themselves. And I think what you saw his season turn when he was on the bench, when he just emphasized offensive rebounding. I mean, he was a monster on the offensive boards for a couple games in a row, and that kind of led to everything else. And it's just a matter of him being aggressive. Why he's not aggressive sometimes, I don't know. I don't know if it's because of the big men or not. But what I do know is Caleb Swanigan didn't play in one game last year, and that was at Minnesota. And I think Vince Edwards had 26 in that game. So I don't know what the causation would be there, but I do know that when Purdue relies on him and needs something from him, oftentimes he delivers, and they're going to need him to next year.
That's what. Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up.
Has to next year. It's not negotiable next year.
Do you think that? I mean, we're all figuring that Swanigan's gone. So, do you think that alongside? I mean, basically the only other big on in the roster, at least coming in that we can really expect. I know Eden Ewing is supposed to be good, but I think Haas and Vince Edwards are going to have to take a huge chunk of the front court minutes. Do you expect Vince to take, just in terms of usage, take a huge chunk of what Swanigan was giving us this year?
Yeah, and Edwards is typically better at the 4, which is where he's obviously playing now, and he'll play full time next year. His matchups are better there. He seems to be more aggressive when he's there. Yeah, that's the other part of it too. Is that he's adjusted to playing a different position. In college, the 3 is basically a guard. And so he goes from being a mismatch for 4s to being the victim of the mismatch athletically more often than not. So I think that probably plays a role. But I think next year, it's not a matter of minutes. It's a matter of usage and, situational usage, what his matchups are, what Purdue needs from him, what Purdue sets him up to do. I talked before about running more stuff directly for him to get him post-ups, to get him drives, whatever the case may be. But I think if you put the ball in his hands and kind of let him do a lot of different things, I think he can be a guy who can be really productive for you. So I think you're going to see a lot of usage from him next season as a primary, playmaker. But also, the question I'll kind of have going into next season is what did this 2-year Swanigan window have on those seniors to be next year in terms of their development into those guys who are going to carry a team? Personally, I think Purdue on paper next year is a 25-win team.
Wow.
Isaac Haas is really good. Vince Edwards, I think, is really good. Carson Edwards is going to be better. Dakota Mathias is really good. Ryan Klein's good. They've got great pieces coming back next year. They're going to lose an elite piece.
Front court depth is going to be an issue, right?
Right, but you've already preemptively signed a junior college player to come in right away. He automatically replaces Smotherman in terms of what they do, the category of player they are. 25 might be ambitious, 23, 24 maybe. But I do think they're going to be a really good team next year. But my question will be, these 2 years were valuable time for, the Mathiases and the Vincent Edwards and the Isaac Haas's to grow into stars. And next year will be the year you need them to be stars. And did they grow into stars while Caleb Swanigan was, this force of nature passing through West Lafayette? That will be interesting to see where those seniors to be are in their developments next year, because they have to carry this team. I mean, they're carrying this team in large part right now. I mean, the substance. I mean, Swanigan's been unbelievable.
Yep.
But the substance and everything else, Swanigan's not winning games by himself. I mean, Edwards, Mathias, P.J. Thompson, Isaac Haas have been really good players, obviously, and really good substance guys. This is their program. It might be Caleb Swanigan's team in some ways, but this is their program.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see, really interesting to see what they do next year, because they'll be the same, but they'll be very different.
No, I really like that the program kind of belongs to, more than anybody else, Mathias and Edwards, Vincent Edwards, but the lead has kind of been Swanigan for the last couple of years. I like that. 2 more questions before we let you go and get a little bit of Weller and sleep. First, are you afraid of Northwestern? Do you think, going to Northwestern, playing, Collins' team
on that purple court?
Yeah, that's right, on that purple court. They seem to be extremely hungry for the postseason, regardless of their late season swoon. I do think they're going to be excited to welcome a top 15 team to their court, top 16 team to their court. Do you think that Purdue, first, do you think like Wisconsin drops a game between them? Because they have 2 games. I think Iowa is one of them. 2 games at home. Iowa is one of them. I forget the other one.
Minnesota.
That's right. if they drop one of those, Purdue clinches outright Big Ten, first outright Big Ten in 21 years.
Right.
But on the other hand, do you think that Purdue clinches just on their own against Northwestern at Northwestern?
It'll be interesting to see, because judging by the number of one-syllable, one-word tweets I saw before getting on with you guys, they won in most dramatic fashion tonight. I guess there's a
I saw that.
Derek Pardon scored at the buzzer to beat Michigan. They're partying right now. I mean, everybody under the sun now thinks Northwestern is in the tournament. So when you look at the dynamic here in this game, you've got one team celebrating a Big Ten title. You've got one team celebrating a surreal win that probably got them in the NCAA tournament. You probably, if you're Purdue, you'd probably rather them have won this game tonight, because if they didn't, you're definitely looking at a situation Sunday where you're walking into an environment where it's the biggest game in program history. Northwestern said that like 20 times in my lifetime, and they've always lost that game. Sometimes in heartbreaking fashion. That's kind of Northwestern's history, though. I kind of half expected Michigan to, kill them tonight, and then Purdue to beat them on a buzzer beater. And poor Northwestern, still out of the tournament. But I think they're probably in the tournament now, so maybe you don't quite get the urgency you would have gotten otherwise. It'll be interesting to see how Purdue responds. I mean, Purdue, this is their last chance to really make a statement to the committee that, hey, we're pretty good. Give us a good seed. This is going to be a CBS game, so this is a statement sort of opportunity for Purdue. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts in terms of the dynamics of this game. I know Northwestern's pretty good, better than what they looked like in Mackey Arena a couple weeks ago, that's for sure.
So speaking of the tournament, so I'm having a hard time putting Purdue in context with the rest of college basketball, given the state of the Big Ten this year. What is success for Purdue in the NCAA tournament? And along with that, what type of team is the archetype for a bad matchup for Purdue?
Well, just looking at it from a matchups perspective, quickness. Quickness more than anything. Athleticism, length. I think you've seen a common denominator in some games where Purdue hasn't shot very well. Length has been one of those. That doesn't mean that's always going to be the case. It has to be pretty good length. It has to be pretty good athleticism, pretty good quickness. I mean, it can't just be quickness for the sake of quickness. But I think those are some of the matchup issues. But the other part of it too, though, is if you're long and tall, but you can't match up with Caleb Swanning and Isaac Haas, good for you. I mean, the team doesn't match up with Purdue too. If Purdue's making threes, length doesn't matter. But I think those are some of the things that you worry about, just from a superficial standpoint. But I think Purdue, it's more about Purdue. I think it's more about Purdue not turning the ball over. It's more about Purdue, containing the dribble better and keeping out of rotations and thus keeping people off the offensive glass. That's been a real sore spot lately. They got to keep people off the offensive glass. Purdue is good in half-court defense. They're good enough in half-court defense. They can't give people second chances. That kept IU alive. That kept Penn State alive. And, you're playing with fire when you do that. But I just think in the NCAA tournament, it's, matchups really matter. But I think it's just as much about Purdue, if not more, because Purdue's not acquitted itself very well in the NCAA tournament the last 2 seasons when it mattered. It's not the 40 minutes; it's the final 5 that have mattered. If not the final 45 seconds. Mm-hmm. These have been absolute comical losses. Where Purdue's had bad luck. There's been some fluke element to this, but as they say, sometimes you make your own luck. And Purdue's done a lot of things to not make its own luck, and it needs to start making its own luck in these situations.
So last question. First round sites. Which one are you looking forward to? Like, which one do you want? You've got Buffalo, Milwaukee, Orlando, Salt Lake. Really just like shining lights for cities. Greensboro, Tulsa. Any one of those sticking out for you?
I want to go to Milwaukee, to be honest with you.
Milwaukee?
I like driving. I like having the flexibility of just being able to just leave when I want to leave, go when I want to go.
True.
You know?
That's true.
I also
Are you a podcast guy? Do you put on an album? You put on Kanye's newest album and go on.
Oh, I had him for a Bob Seger guy.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm an NPR guy.
Okay, there you go.
All right.
I'm old and boring. So
you and me both.
when I can't when I can't find that, I've got my iPod in my car. I haven't gone to the trouble in like 10 years of updating the music on my iPod, so it's all the same stuff. So all these CDs that I've bought in the last 15 years or whatever it is that I don't have the technology to even play anymore because my computer doesn't have a disc drive and my car doesn't have a CD player. I don't have them out, so they're useless to me. They're absolutely useless to me. So I'm at the mercy of the radio and whatever music I first put on my iPod when I first got it.
15 years ago, so a lot of Britney Spears, NSYNC.
Actually, when I really want to hear a certain song, I play it on YouTube on my phone, but that kills your data. It kills your data.
Listen,
It's bad business.
that Spotify Premium, man.
Yeah, that's what I do.
That's what it is.
That's where
That's
it's
what
at.
it is.
Or archived episodes of the Purdue basketball beat.
That's
Also,
right.
were the options.
Just listen to Neubert from a year ago. We're fine.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Brian. We really appreciate it. We hope you get your Milwaukee destination for the Big Ten tournament, and for the Big Ten or for the NCAA tournament. We hope you get a couple DC games, out of this. So.
Yeah. I've covered Big Ten basketball for quite a long time. This will be my second flight into DC in the course of one Big Ten basketball season, and I've flown into New York City twice in the last 2 years. The Big Ten's changed, man. It's
East Coast,
crazy.
Man.
It's crazy. It sucks for us. It sucks for our budget. I mean, more than anything, it's just crazy. The amount of money we spend on travel now, it's just insane. But
It's that coastal bias.
That's
what I'm saying.
TV eyeballs. Well, thanks, Brian. We really appreciate it.
You guys are welcome. Thank you for having me, and you got it in with 6% left on my laptop battery. So
I'm really impressed. That was really good.
Clutch performance there by you guys. Nice job.
That's all we do, baby.
Thanks for talking to us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
No problem.